I dreaded this trip, and that might sound surprising considering who I am and what I've been doing for the last 11 years. But for 3.5 of those years, the place that I loved was shut out from me. And for a very long time, not only did I feel like I was never going to be able to go back, but sometimes I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. Now, obviously this is both a selfish and hyperbolic perspective. I mean, of course Japan was going to open back up eventually, and of course I wasn't the only one who was extremely bothered by the then trend of what felt like Japan's return to Sakoku. But that's the thing about our subconscious and feeling brain. It doesn't care about what's going on around it. It only focuses on itself despite how much our thinking brain fights it. And what certainly didn't help was all the negative press that surrounded Japan at the time, with headlines underlining Japan's utter refusal for allowing students, families, and business owners back in Japan, as well as countless highly selective interviews that seemed to paint Japan in the light of being completely content with being separated from the rest of the world. All the while, they were free to travel to their foreign vacation destinations, while the residents of said countries were forbidden from entering Japan. It hurt, and it hurt for a long time. So when Japan finally opened up completely on May 8th and my return trip rolling around on the 13th, I was glad to be going back to Japan, but I wasn't excited. I was actually kind of terrified. Terrified that I no longer loved what I devoted so much of my life to. During the COVID lockdowns, something kind of snapped in my brain, and up till that time, my subconscious started directing me away to other things, other interests. It was actually something that I went to therapy for and came to find out that either I was moving on from Japan permanently, or my subconscious was filling in a hole temporarily. After all, my personal plans were utterly derailed in late 2019 and stayed derailed for years. So while I was glad to be returning to Japan, I was filled with dread, because I didn't want to stop loving Japan. But it felt like that wasn't my choice anymore. So on May 13th, I got on the plane, landed in Narita, and I remembered. I remembered everything that I loved, everything that I cherished, and the reason why I devoted my life to being a cultural bridge between the US and Japan. In 2 weeks' time, 3 years of sadness and cynicism melted away, and I felt like I was right back where I left off. So for anyone out there who felt like I did, like your love for Japan evaporated during COVID, or maybe you're afraid of what Japan is now post-COVID, I want to take you on the same journey that I did in hopes that you'll come back around like I did, rediscovering the reason why you fell in love with the country in the first place. So after a quick couple of kombini runs and a day to get my bearings after a 3.5-year absence, I was ready to rediscover what I left behind. My buddy Matt Papa, who was kind enough to put me in Aki up for a couple of weeks, took me back to a regular site that I'd always visited since my first trips in 2015, Odaiba, with Diver City still just the same as I left it. The same 7-floor mall with a massive round 1, the same venerable Gundam base, and the same unicorn Gundam that oversaw the constant influx of people. But while Diver City hadn't changed, there were some other post-COVID ripples within Odaiba that left me feeling a bit empty. It still broke my heart that Ueda Onsen Monogatari had long since gone, closed down in 2001 not due to COVID, but due to Japan's unique land leasing laws. It was such a spectacular sight and experience, giving folks a pseudo-Edo experience through not just their well-known onsen, but food, decor, architecture, and even dress remnant of 1700s Japan. Though it may have been a small thing, donning a rented yukata and walking around the recreation of an Edo period urban sprawl is something that will stick with me for the rest of my life, and now it's just kinda gone. And another big surprise actually came from Gundam Base. While it's true Diver City hadn't changed and Gundam Base itself had still the same massive showcases of Gunpla-inspired art, the shopping there was left much to be desired. Stacks upon stacks of the same few kits left and right. It was actually kinda bizarre. The most limited stock I'd ever seen in the shop, and it left me incredibly puzzled until I learned that since COVID, resellers and scalping had become a mass epidemic in Japan. So much so that we were limited to one purchase a day of only 10 items at Gundam Base. But there was one change to my usual experience at Odaiba that brought me so much joy that I know now that I need to make it a regular stop with my future visits. And it came not more than a 5-minute walk from Diver City to the decks. Odaiba Ichichome Shotengai. While Ueda Onsen Monogatari made its visitors feel like they walked back into 1700s Japan, Odaiba Ichichome made visitors feel like they walked back into 1950s Japan, and I freaking loved it! With this single stretch of recreated road, there's not an inch that isn't plastered with Showa-era vibe, like its massive retro arcade for example. Not only will you find more modern retro arcade games like House of the Dead, Jurassic Park Arcade, and the earliest of the Taiko no Tatsujin games, but rows of 50s pachinko machines surrounded by iconography of the time. And if that isn't your vibe, there's also era-appropriate pinball back-to-back. Or maybe one old-fashioned arm wrestling match with an automaton sumo wrestler. And all this is just the beginning. Continuing down the street, and there's more and more that pops out. A Christmas tree of Pez dispensers, old 3-wheel trucks, an entire row of 50 soda machines featuring preserved cans of the most popular drinks of that era, and Karakuri Hyakaten. Oh, Karakuri Hyakaten! Like the name suggests, it's a bit of a department store, but for all manner of wild, goofy goods. Like, think Spencer's, but both Japanese and Showa retro. However, the real draw of this place is the Daigashiya built in half of the store. Now, Daigashiya are Japan's equivalent to the US's penny candy stores, a place for kids with lighter allowances to pick up various sweets and goof around with less complicated arcade games. And Karakuri Hyakaten? Oh lordy, is there a treasure trove of cheap sweets there. But don't think cheap means crappy quality. This was the store that introduced me to my new favorite chocolate of all time, Black Thunder. And you see this? All this candy? Yeah, we got all this for less than $30. All of it unique to Japan, and much of it unique to the retro vibe of Daibichi Chome.
Did you bring me back some?
Jeez, don't scare me like that.
Dude, you've been gone for almost a month while I've been sitting here twiddling my non-existent thumbs. I think I speak for everyone when I say it's about time we get back into making cultural analysis vids. And also ask if you brought enough sweets back for the rest of the class.
Well, no, it's not exactly like I could afford to get goodies from Karakuri for 40,000 some odd people. But you know what's interesting about this haul? Some of the snacks that we picked up, I remember seeing in Boxu. Yeah, the Dondon Yaki, the Mochan Dango, those were two of my top 3 picks from Boxu's starter set. So I gotta ask you, do you want in on all this? Well, you absolutely can with Boxu. I mean, I'm always looking forward to my next round of culturally themed treats. And this month, with Japanese Suyu season right around the corner, I've been blessed with the Midori Summer Box. What, never heard of Suyu? Well, you can actually learn all about it within this booklet in the box, showcasing not only relevant Japanese terminology to learn, but also facts about Japanese unique cultural events that surround the season. Rice planting festivals, the importance of Japanese Ajisa hydrangeas, and the simple charm of Teru Teru Bozu. All the while you get over a dozen green goodies from Aomori and Yamagata, hey, I actually went there on this trip, all the way to Ohita. With my personal choices of summer vegetation-themed snacks being the Baumkuchen Matcha Tree Cake, named such based on its mini rings and rich matcha flavor, the 1,000-year-old mini awa okoshi candy of Osaka with its blend of sesame and sugar, and the surprisingly sweet tang of Kyonosato Shiro Miso Senbei. White miso and rice koji come together making a surprisingly sweet senbei. So if you want to get a taste of Japan's culture, hit up my link in the description and use the code Gaijin15 to get $15 off your purchase. Shipping's free and you can cancel anytime.
So come take a literal bite out of Japan's culture with Boxu.
But anyway, let's get back to it, because that was just the beginning of this trip. After finally being able to hang out with Matt Alt, the author of several books on Japanese pop culture, yokai, and ninja that I've used and will continue to use in my videos, Aki and I packed up our stuff, jumped on the Hayabusa Shinkansen, and made our way to Sendai to reunite with 2 of our oldest friends, Tomo and Hutch. Friends we made while they were studying abroad at our college who've become our closest confidants in Japan. While Sendai may not be as big as Tokyo or Kyoto, it's still just as crammed with culture as any big city in Japan. Namely, Sendai was the realm in which the legendary Date Masamune ruled over.
Are you ready, guys? Alright, let's ride on!
Yeah, that Date Masamune. In fact, Aki and I, alongside Tomo and Hutch, went to Zuiholden, the golden mausoleum of Date Masamune, and boy does that name hold up. Granted, the grounds themselves aren't as bombastic as, say, Meiji Jingu, but there's no less splendor surrounding the site of Masamune and the rest of the Date family. After a trail of several steps, gigantic trees, and a quick stop at the Chozuya, we were greeted by the Nehanmon Gate and made our way to Zuiholden, and just wow this thing! The colors, the intricate detail, this place is just as decorated, bombastic, outlandish, and stylish as Date Masamune himself. And it's not just Masamune, but the entire Date family that makes their residence here surrounded in natural and man-made splendor. Now, there's a whole lot more to the Kyogamine cemetery of the Date family here, but there's so much more that I need to talk about with this trip that if you'd like a more dedicated video on Date Masamune and his family's freaking gorgeous place of rest, let me know in the comments. So after showing our respects to Masamune, Tomo and Hutch drove us nearly 3 hours out to their home in Shonai Machi, a cozy Inaka town in Yamagata that, despite being surrounded by the simple things that I love about the Inaka countryside, wide and comprehensible mountain ranges, vast open fields of agriculture, and some of the most stunning skies you'll ever see in your life, it had its own humble urban life of restaurants, shopping centers, and above all, locales of culture. Like the Shonai Jinja, for example, a shrine that has a lot more than your average affair of torii gates and samusho. Shonai Jinja had within it an incredibly impressive mini-museum of art and artifacts from the city's past. A massive collection of kokeshi dolls, dioramas, decade-old miniatures and figures depicting famous folktales in Japan, miniaturized samurai armor spanning from the Heian O-Yoroi to the Sengoku Do-Maru, to even Edo-period karakuri automatons. And outside the museum, Shonai Jinja had a rather unique way of obtaining omikuji fortunes. Where most shrines have a box full of sticks that would deliver your fortune, at Shonai you literally fish it out with an old-timey rod and everything. And no, I didn't get horrible fortune, but rather a middling luck that focuses on paying attention to life changes, which is about to get very, very important as I'll point out at the end of this video. Moving on, the four of us head off to Tsuruoka City to discover the history behind a group of Shonai samurai that gave up their swords during the Boshin War in favor of raising silkworms to create a local legend textile industry. The Matsugaoka Silk Farm still not only houses a centuries-old business of textiles, but also has a pretty in-depth museum showcasing the traditional method of raising silkworms, harvesting their cocoons, processing said cocoons, and their process of printing and dyeing the fabrics. And not only can you see this process, but you can feel it too, getting quite literally hands-on with the silk in its various stages of processing. Not exactly the most in-demand locale of Japanese culture, but if you ever wondered to what lengths a lot of post-war samurai entrepreneurs were going to in order to find a new life in a peaceful Japan, this is a pretty good example of it and the legacy that it forged. From there, it was a series of hopping to other shrines and temples, all of them though in close association with the three sacred mountains of Dewa, Mount Haguro representing the world of the present, Mount Gassan representing the world of the past and death, and Mount Yudono representing the future. First was Dewa Sansan Jinja, which was just utterly stunning. Despite the fact that much of it was under renovation, there was so much more here to see than I originally thought. Past the massive majestic trees that led up to the shrine, the four of us found something that I'd personally never seen before. A square patch of concrete surrounded by shimenawa and shide that was used by Shinto priests and Yamabushi monks to bless cars. Yeah, I heard about the new trend of priests blessing laptops and other hardware, but this is the first time I ever saw a place for cars of all things. But it makes sense though. If you've ever seen how tight a lot of these quote two-way streets in Japan are, you too could believe that it would take divine intervention to prevent vehicles on these roads from crashing into one another. Anyway, while much of the main shrine on Mount Haguro was under renovation, it gave Aki and I a very unique opportunity. The shrine was taking special donations for the renovation, and by dropping about $16 to the cause, you could put your name and home location onto a single plank of wood that would be used during the reconstruction. Granted, this is a forearm length of wood used to rebuild a building 50 feet tall, but it's kinda cool to think that my name's gonna be slotted down somewhere in the architecture of this building that means so much to the various Yamabushi monks who live and practice within Mount Haguro. I even got a swanky little bookmark for the occasion. Next up, we head off to the west coast of Yamagata to hit up Kamo Aquarium. Not exactly the largest aquarium in Japan, but what's set apart from others in my mind is their showcase of old school fishing rods from the Edo and pre-Edo periods, as well as their specialization of jellyfish. This aquarium has more species of jellyfish in one location than any other part of the world, deep sea or otherwise. Not only do they have over 50 species on display, not only is there a 5-meter tall tank of 2,000 moon jellies that made the backdrop for people's musical performances, but they also raise dozens of breeds of jellyfish on location. Yeah, I know it's not exactly a locale chock full of traditional Japanese culture, but if you're any kind of marine biologist, Kamo is absolutely something you gotta add to your bucket list. Aside from a quick trip to Okuyunohama Onsen Tatsunoyu for an onsen dip and hours of relaxation around a more natural take on Japan that was 3 years in the making, and a quick stop at Sakata for a quick intake of its local culture of the protector Chishigata lion dogs and tragic TV drama of Oshin, the four of us had a showing of the Mario movie in Japanese to catch before it was time to head back to Sendai and then back to Tokyo. But once back in Tokyo with our buds Matt and Jess, we met up with Charlotte and together hit up the legendary shopping outlet of Nakano Broadway. And what starts out as a pretty easygoing street of shops gives way to 5 floors of some of the wildest vendors I've ever seen. Countless pieces of Americana paraphernalia. Disney, Simpsons, Smurfs, Ren and Stimpy, Mr. Clean, freaking Street Sharks, Bump in the Night. Yeah, who remembers that one? California Raisins, the General Mills cereal monsters, and so many more. But it wasn't just American nostalgia being sold at these venues. Gegege no Kitaro, Godzilla, Sailor Moon, Tamagotchi, Tiger Mask goods, including some of the real Tiger Masks, were all available. There was even a Warhammer shop in the depths of this place selling tons of fantasy and 40k sets for prices even cheaper than the US. There were even a handful of things that I've never seen on game store shelves, like a pair of Drukari dice that we got for Aki. All in all, there's something here for everyone in Nakano Broadway, so if you're in the area, you gotta check it out. And speaking of Warhammer, yes, we absolutely went to the Akihabara Warhammer Cafe, but to be honest, it was kinda mid. Not to say that it had a bad atmosphere, no room to play games, spoiler stock shelves, or a lack of 40k themed drinks, but it just didn't feel, I don't know, cozy? Completely opposite to my experience to the Warhammer store in Harajuku. As soon as I walked into there, I was met by this awesome gal named Yuka who immediately got me opening up and talking about favorite armies, the history of Warhammer in Japan, and she even showed off some of her unique kit bashes, which was, well, it was pleasantly surprising to say the least. One of the things that worried me about possibly moving to Japan was not being able to find people that shared my newfound love of being a Warhammer miniature hobbyist. But after that experience, I know I'm in good hands. So, if you're a Warhammer fan in Japan, you're doing yourself a disservice by not checking this place out. Tell them Gaijin sent you. Then there was my regular trip to Meiji Jingu that I make every time I'm in Tokyo, and this particular trip, well, it felt wrong. I'll explain in more details in a future video as to why it didn't feel right, but let's just say I can't escape the feeling that it's being over-touristed. And you can see that in the eyes and hear it in the voice of the people working there. Sure, they're making a ton of money and they're getting a lot of attention, but during my stop at Meiji Jingu, I think I saw the worst in tourist behavior that I've ever seen in all the time I've been in Japan. But this wasn't something that a 3D Tanuki latte couldn't fix at Cafe Reissue. Weird name I know, but a stone's throw from that Harajuku Warhammer shop was this quaint little cafe that makes 2D and 3D art of whatever image you show them. Within reason, of course. I was there with Kaho Shibuya with her recommendation and I was not let down. Though the menu's a bit small, the variety of sandwiches and curry did not disappoint, and my chalky milk tanuki absolutely went down smooth. There were a couple other quick trips. A day in Asakusa to hit up my favorite taiko store, Miyamoto Unosuke Shoten, to grab some new bachi sticks and a few more Shinobue flutes. A quick trip through Kappabashi and Seoul Genji Temple. A quick dinner with Akideris and Joey. A tearful reunion with my favorite Tebasaki chicken wing place that I thought was only available in Nagoya, Yamachan. And finally, a little contemplation time at an isolated shrine to get my thoughts together about everything I was mentally going through on this trip. Oh, and Daikayan. That place deserves its own independent video. An amusement center in Chiba with a massive game center, indoor go-kart track, dozens of pool tables and electric dartboards, batting cages, Americana culture spanning every square inch of the place, and my own personal introduction to an ultra-horny Bomberman MMO. Yeah, like I said, it needs its own video. Looking back, it feels really stupid that I dreaded this trip back to Japan after 3 grueling years. All the negative media, all of the overblown hyperbole, all of the fear that Japan had become a place I couldn't love anymore, it all just utterly vanished even just after a few days. Japan has not changed. Sure, there's a lot of people walking around with masks on still, but even that's beginning to subside. Japan is what it is, with all its same faults and fascinations. As I said at the beginning of this video, I wasn't hyped to be in Japan. Rather, there was a very subtle, gentle feeling of mental comfort, like being home. Knowing that and knowing there are so many people waiting for me to come back, well, it's about time I really start working hard trying to make it my home. But for those of you watching on your phone, tablet, or computer, I hope that after watching this, you, like me, will not only remember what makes this country so freaking awesome, but that you'll check it out for yourself. There's so much to do and see there, not just in the big cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto, but even out in the countryside like Shonai and Tsuruoka. And with the yen still on the weaker end compared to the dollar, this is the time to go. My only question now is, are you? Thanks for watching, everyone, and hey, if you can't make it out of Japan, you can bring a chunk of Japan to you through bulk soup. Hit up my link in the description, use the code Gaijin15 to get $15 off your order to get a bite out of Japan's culture for yourself. Next time, it seems my patrons want me to talk about some of the not-so-great experiences of this trip, so yeah, prepare for the Mr. Hyde portion of this two-parter. More than a rant, it's more of a cautionary warning to folks wanting to visit Japan after 3 years of closed borders. So, if you're planning that trip, you're not gonna wanna miss this. But until next time, everyone, this is Gaijin Goombah, signing out.